Pagbati sa inyo mga kapatid at mga kaibigan sa pangalan ng ating Panginoong Hesukristo. Sa pagpapatuloy ng ating Sunday School sa Christian Holiness, tayo pa rin ay nasa paksa ng mga kasangkapan ng biyaya o means of grace na ating itinutuntong sa prinsipyo na God supplies graces but He ordinarily uses ordained means to activate the Spirit and the Word and to refresh the cycle we have been familiarizing with simula sa goal to be holy, inaalam natin ang mga kasalanang papatayin, mga biyayang lilinangin, at ang mga pamantayan na ipamumuhay natin, pero hindi kumpleto yan kung wala ang mga kasangkapan. So, execution of means completes the cycle. Sa pag-aaral natin ang means of grace, ay hinati natin sa private at corporate. Nasa corporate na tayo at nasa usapin ng disiplina. Ilagay lang muli natin sa Reformed theology ng marks of a true church. What makes a true church as represented by this roadmap ay merong essential mark na dapat palaging naroon na siyang proclamation of the word and particularly of the gospel. But there are two maintaining marks na pag-aralan natin, ang administration of the sacraments at kasulukuyan natin may taga-aralan ang ikalawa na exercise of discipline. Bakit may dalawang kategorya? Sapagkat a church may be true at one time without the maintaining marks, but without the maintaining marks, a church will not perpetuate for generations. So para mapanatili ang pagkatotoo ng iglesia, isa sa mga kailangan ay ang disiplina, at ito'y sinimula nating pag-aralan noong nakaraang linggo, at pinakita ko na ang pangunahin sa disiplina ay positibo, and it is known as formative discipline. It is when we are forming the discipleship of members in the church through the teacher's duty to minister the word, and that is part of the discipling process. Pero kailangan din ang partisipasyon ng mga miyembro, the members' duty to instruct and admonish one another. So when we think of discipline, we should not immediately jump to corrective discipline. There is first formative discipline. Positive discipling is the foundation and for prevention of corrective discipline. Pero hindi maiiwasan na meron talagang corrective discipline, and corrective discipline is the application of measured censure for restoration of those who are offenders. At sa ating mga sinasagot na katanungan, we only had time last week to consider and answer the first question, where is authority of discipline derived, or what is called the power of key. I presented three agencies of authority: ministerial jurisdiction in matters of teaching, official recognition in matters that may be beyond the ministerial but not yet open in public, and then there is congregational imposition. Makikita natin that these three are implicit in Matthew 18 process na nagsisimula sa one-on-one, and then in verse 17 it gradually expands into having arbiters, which we can imply to be or infer to be the officers of the church. And then when there is no repentance, that's when it becomes a matter for church discipline. Ang ikalawang itatanong natin sa leksyon na ito ay, what offenses merit discipline? These are now matters of censure. Now, isipin natin that all sins are sins against God, therefore must be confessed to God, but not all sins are for the censure of the church. That is the reason why we need to ask this question. Hindi lahat ng pagkakasala ay usaping disiplina ng iglesia. Halimbawa, there are personal and internal sins. For example, our thoughts, our attitudes, our motives, these are internal, these are personal issues. Hindi natin pwedeng gawing usaping disiplina yan sa iglesia, sapagkat lahat tayo ay mayroong ganyang usaping kasalanan. As the psalmist confesses in Psalm 19, who can discern his errors? Forgive my hidden faults. So there are hidden faults, faults that are not known to others and cannot be a matter for discipline. There is also the prayer in Psalm 139, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So there are things that are offensive, but they are offensive to God, and we ask God's dealing with us so that we can deal with those offensive things, but they are matters of the heart at hindi magiging usaping disiplina. isasama din natin dito ang matatawag na interpersonal and private conflicts. May mga sigalot sa pagitan ng dalawa o ilang mga kapatiran na dapat nilang ayusin sa kanilang sitwasyon between brethren or family issues. And we see that in the process of Matthew 18, between you and him alone, na pagsasaayos ng sigalot ng mga kapatiran. There is also the exhortation or challenge of Proverbs 25:9. If you argue your case with a neighbor, do not betray another man's confidence. So makikita natin dito na may mga alitan na hindi dapat palakihin at hindi dapat isa publiko na nakita na rin natin noong nakaraang leksyon. So there are matters of offenses that we do not make matters for censure. Remember, all are guilty of internal offenses. Isipin nyo na lang kung magdisiplina tayo dahil sa motibo, sa pag-iisip, sa kalooban, walang linggo na hindi tayo magdidisiplina sapagkat lahat yan ay nagkakasala tayo. Censure pertains to public offenses. Offenses that are known to others, and depending on the degree ay doon papasok ang usaping disiplina. Ang matitingnan lang natin sa leksyon na ito ay doctrinal offenses, mga pagkakasala na may kinalaman sa pagtuturo. Now, we are talking here of advocating doctrines contrary to the church confession, which reminds us again of the importance of having a church confession, which we do in the confession of the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith. We do not put this on rival of authority with the scriptures, but we use the confession to define what we believe to be the scriptures teaching on various areas of doctrine. Kaya't mahalaga na mayroong confession ang iglesia. At hindi natin tinutukoy dito ang isang paniniwala na sa pribado niya pinangahawakan pero hindi naman niya ikinakalat, hindi niya itinuturo. That is not a matter for discipline. For example, a member may personally not hold to Reformed theology, but he is accepted as a member of the church because he is a true believer, which we should, pero hindi pa siya kumbinsido sa katuruan ng Reformed. Hindi ibig sabihin na agad siyang didisiplinahin, wag lamang niyang ikalat sa publiko. The effect of doctrinal offenses, however, when they become public, is that they sow disunity. Nagtatanim siya ng pagkakahati-hati sa iglesia. Kaya ganito ang babala ni Pablo in Ephesians 4:13 and 14. Ang goal ng iglesia is we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. At para marating natin yan, ang sinabi niya sa verse 14, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. So may mga ganyan na ang katuruan ay nagiging naikakalat sa iglesia, na nagiging dahilan ng pagkakahati sa iglesia. Kaya ano itong mga doctrinal offenses na ito? Tatlong uri. Ang isa yung tinatawag na heresy. Heresy is teaching that undermines the gospel. And of course, as we have seen, the one primary mark, essential mark of a true church is that it proclaims the gospel. So anything that is contrary to the gospel violates the very essential identity of the church. Kaya dapat na hindi ito pabayaan. The Galatians 1:8 is very clear, though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we, the apostles, have preached unto you, let him be accursed. Hindi ibig sabihin nito na ang iglesia ang naglalagay ng curse. It simply means we are recognizing that a person that violates the gospel, a person that is anti-apostolic gospel, is already under God's curse, and we simply recognize formally in church censure such curse already imposed on him by God for violating the gospel. And there is also the warning of Jesus, seven churches of Asia Minor, as we read in the book of Revelation. Particularly instructive is his warning to the church in Pergamum, kahit na meron siyang commendation sa church for being faithful and even readiness to martyrdom, pero sinaway ang iglesia dahil sa pagiging maluwag at pabaya nila sa mga nagtuturo ng maling doktrina, particularly in reference are those that are called the doctrine of Balaam, the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Ano man yun, ang pinapakita rito ay kahit pa may maganda sa iglesia, hindi kalooban ng Panginoong Hesukristo ng iglesia ay magpabaya sa doktrinang uh, nagiging kamalian pagdating sa katuruan ng Ebanghelyo. Then next to heresy, there are schism, or others pronounce this as schism. Ito ay tumutukoy sa teaching that defies the official doctrine. Kaya hindi man ito gospel, pero merong tinitindigan na ang iglesia based upon the confession of faith that we have agreed upon as the belief of the church. Kapag nagturo ng lumalabag sa tinatanggap na katuruan sa iglesia, ito ay nagpapasimula ng pagkakawatak-watak. At may babala si Pablo, Romans 16:17, I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them. So makikita natin na meron na silang natutunan. Ngayon, maaring may magturo na labag doon sa naituro na sa kanila ng apostol, at may sinabi ritong keep away from them. Hindi lang ito basta iwasan sila, ito ay desisyon sa iglesia na lumayo bilang disiplina sa mga ganitong nagiging sanhi ng pagkakawatak dahilan sa maling pagtuturo. At ilang ulit ko nang nagamit ang 1 Timothy 1 verse 3, where Apostle Paul tells Timothy that he was to charge some that they teach no other doctrine. Gaya ng aking sinabi, makikita rito that the one who has authority of teaching in the church, in this case, the minister of the church, has authority to charge what is to be taught and what is not to be taught. So, these doctrinal offenses also include what can be categorized as fanaticism. What is fanaticism? Is teaching dogmatically a matter of mere opinion. Maaaring meron kang kuro-kuro sa ilang bagay sa lipunan gaya ng politika, o maaaring ilagay natin sa kasalukuyang krisis ng pandemya. There are people in America who think that refusing the vaccine is a matter of trust in God, and that is a form of fanaticism. Now, I would defend the freedom of those who in conscience would not want to take the vaccine, but then for them to say that those who do have the vaccine are failing in trusting in God, that is a form of fanaticism. Kapag ang opinion mo, ang kuro-kuro mo ay ginawa mong usaping doktrina, mali na iyon. One is free to hold an opinion, but he must not make it an issue of doctrine. When he does, it becomes fanaticism. At ayaw natin ng ganyan na pagtuturo sa iglesia, sapagkat ang gusto nating maituro ay ang salita ng Diyos, hindi opinion ng tao. Kaya yan ang tatlong uri ng doctrinal offense na maaring mangyari: ang heresy, ang schism, at ang fanaticism. Ang dapat ingatan dito ay this can be done with subtlety. May katusuhan. Ibig sabihin, maaring gumagamit ng paraan, bagamat hindi sila tumatayo sa pulpito para ituro ito, ay maaring nilang maikalat sa mga tusong paraan by secret meetings, by circulating reading materials. I've seen this happen even in our church in the past many years ago, at ito ay hindi dapat pabayaan, sapagkat maaring maging sanhi ng pagkawatak sa iglesia. So, as far as doctrinal offenses are concerned, the principle to maintain is that the official teaching of the church must be from biblical authority. Pero diyan papasok ang usapin na kailan natin masasabi na this is biblical authority when everybody is claiming to be using the Bible and any teacher can cite a text or two in order to defend and argue his case? Well, there are certain parameters. Kaya nga, dyan, babalik tayo sa confession of faith. Merong dapat na ipinahayag ng pananampalatayang iglesia, pinagsang-ayunan na, pinagtipanan na. May ganitong sinabi si Apostol Pablo, the formal teaching that the church considers biblical is its confession, which Paul describes as the deposit of faith, as he tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, guard the deposit. At yung tinutukoy na deposit ay katuruan na ipinaingat na sa kanya bilang kinatawan ni Apostol Pablo, entrusted to you, avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. So, pag sinabi natin na biblical teaching must govern the church, but what will determine that that is biblical, merong pinagsang-ayunan na ang iglesia at pinagtipanan na kanilang paniniwala sa confession of faith. And then, ito rin ang isang parameter na pinag-aralan natin last week ay ministerial authority. There is an office of authority as far as teaching is concerned, and that is the one recognized in the ministry. The official authority in the church for teaching is ministerial or pastoral. So Hebrews 13 verse 7 defines what it is they do as elders of the church. Remember them which have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their life or conversation. So makikita natin dito na ang binigyan ng autoridad na ituro kung ano ang dapat malaman mula sa salita ng Diyos na nakasulat ay ang mga itinalaga at kinilala sa iglesia ng mga tagapangunang tagapagturo. So, the question that I'm sure some will raise is the minister himself censorable for his teaching? And the immediate answer is yes. After all, no office, no officer, and no member for that matter has any absolute authority in the church. Walang tagapanguna, walang miyembro na merong lubos-lubos ang autoridad sa iglesia. The New Testament in fact anticipates that falsehood will emerge from official teachers. When Apostle Paul addressed the elders of Ephesus in the Isle of Miletus, one of the warnings he gave in Acts 20:29-30, I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves, remember, kausap niya rito yung mga elders. So, of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. So makikita natin na hindi sinasabing ang mga nasa panunungkulan ng pagtuturo ay sakdal at hindi magkakamali sa kanilang pagtuturo, merong babala. So there is no absolute authority, but however, because they are in the ministerial teaching office, there should be deference to their teaching. There is to be a respectful disposition to ministerial teaching. Ito ang sabi ni Paul din kay Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:15, which we should expect of those who labor faithfully. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, or rightly setting a course in the word of truth. So kung ganyan ang nakikita mo naman sa nagtuturo sa iglesia, ay dapat bigyan ito ng kaukulang paggalang sa kanyang pagtuturo. So, isang mahalagang tingnan natin, because there is no absolute authority, a minister may be challenged for departure from the truth. Apostle Paul again makes a case of that in certain individuals like Hymenaeus, Alexander na pinangalanan niya in 1 Timothy 1:19, who made shipwreck of the faith. Sa makatwid dapat na kung kinakailangan ay hamunin ang maging opisyal na tagapagturo kung alam natin at nakikita ng nakararami na siya'y naliligaw sa kanyang pagtuturo. Dalawang pagkakamali ang dapat nating ingatan dito. The first kind of error by way of historical uh, administration ay being critical of the minister out of personal bias. Ito ang nangyari kay Jonathan Edwards ng kanyang ituro at pairalin ang tinatawag niyang visible sainthood as qualification for the Lord's Supper. Maraming natamaan. Kaya ang nangyari, ang mga kalalakihan doon na sila lang ang pwedeng bumoto at that time, ay nagsama-sama para itiwalag itong si Jonathan Edwards, samantalang itinuturo lamang niya ang pagtuturo ng salita ng Diyos. Yan ang isang pagkakamali, maging mapagpunakang masyado sa tatapagturo na anuman ang kanyang ituro ay ayaw mo nang tingnan sa Biblia, kundi gusto mo na lang siyang punahin at tuligsain. Ayan ang isang pagkakamali. Ang ikalawang pagkakamali ay unchallenged departure from orthodoxy. Yung hindi na hinahamon ang kanyang pagtuturo na lumilihis na sa katotohanan. Ang isang historical illustration nito ay si William Miller. William Miller was a Baptist minister who in the 19th century began calculating certain passages of the Bible and came up with the conclusion that Jesus Christ was coming at a certain date in 1844 at nang hindi ito mangyari, naging malaking katitisuran sa marami. Tinawag itong the Great Disappointment. And William Miller himself repented of his error, but he has started a movement that later on became Seventh-day Adventism. Here is a case of an error from a departure from orthodoxy that was not immediately corrected. Ayaw natin ng ganyang pagkakamali na laging tumutuligsa sa nagtuturo o hindi naman kaya hindi na hinahamon ang paglihis sa katotohanan ng tagapagturo. So para maiwasan natin ito, there are practical thoughts that I want to share, 7 of this, in order to make us ready to defer and at the same time be helpful to the one in the teaching office. The first is make teaching gifts paramount for ministerial choice. Of course, kasama ang mga karakter, kasama ang kanyang pagkatao, subalit isinama sa lahat ng mga qualifications for ministry ay ang kakayahan na magturo. Halimbawa, sinabi ni Paul sa Titus 1 verse 9, ang mga itatalaga sa pagkatagapanguna ay they are holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the disputers. So, able, may kakayahan na magturo ng katotohanan para makapaghamon sa mga banal at maiwasto ang mga nagkakamali. Then my second practical advice is be willing to learn and appreciate as from God what is learned. So sa halip na i-evaluate mo lang from your own idea of what is good teaching and preaching, seek what can be learned. And when you learn something, take it as from God, a gift from God, and therefore to be appreciated. Then correct and mortify any biased critical attitude to the teacher. Maaring mayroon tayong ganyan na naitatago, maaring may karanasan ka sa nakalipas at nagkaroon ka ng pagbabago ng saloobin sa tagapagturo at maaring humubog yan sa iyong diwa sa tuwing makikinig ka. Well, you have to examine that, correct and mortify any biased critical attitude to the teacher dahil ikaw ang hindi makikinabang sa isang kaparaanan ng biyaya. Isa pa, not everyone has the gift of public teaching. And I want to emphasize, nothing wrong with that. Kaya huwag mong ipagpilitan ng isang halimbawa gusto mong kaibigan pero wala namang kakayahan magturo pero gusto mong magturo dahil kaibigan mo siya, hindi dapat. Ingatan natin ang posisyon, ang katungkulan ng pagtuturo na ang ilalagay natin doon ay may kaloob. At kung walang mali na hindi siya magturo. Yan ang sinabi ni Pablo, Romans 12 verse 3, I say, through the grace given to me, to every man that is among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think. In the context, clearly it has to do with the exercise of gift. So kung walang gift of public teaching, wag nating ipilit ng dahil lang sa magaang ang kalooban natin sa taong iyon. Then ask the minister about a public subject to be taught if not sure. Kung ikaw ang nagtuturo pero hindi ka pa official minister, meron kang kailangang ituro, binigyan ka ng pagkakataon, maganda yon. Pero kung meron kang hindi sigurado, magkaroon ka ng kababaang loob na magtanong sa mga opisyal na tagapagturo para madagdagan o mapagtibay o di naman kaya maiwasto ang anuman na maaari mong maituro sa publiko. Then, there comes time that you may correct the minister privately if he makes an error of discourse. Nakita natin ito na ginawa ni Aquila at Priscilla kay Apollos, bagamat magaling siyang magturo, may kakulangan at iwinaston nila siya sa isang pribadong paraan. At when we do that, a humble minister would be very appreciative of such correction. And then there comes a point when censure has to be exercised. You censure a minister who persists in teaching contrary to the truth. That's why you have the confession of faith, the covenant, and then you can seek the help of others who have the knowledge, perhaps officers in the church, fellow elders, or elders of other churches in order to assess the teaching of the minister. So, ang mahalaga sa disiplina ng iglesia ay panatilihin natin ang doktrina na pinanghawakan ng iglesia. Kaya suriin natin ang ating saloobin sa bagay na ito ng pagdidisiplina na may kinalaman sa katuruan. Ang tamang pag-iisip is that the teaching of the church constitutes its essential identity as belonging to Christ. Kung tayo kabilang kay Kristo, hindi ito mailalahad sa pamamagitan lang ng pagkahayag na ako'y kay Kristo, makikita sa ating pinangahawakang katuruan. Kaya ang tamang pag-iisip, I will have regard for the teaching of the church and the ministry recognized to safeguard it. So the right action or habit is, I will by God's grace humbly learn from the teaching in the church while submitting to the scriptures ultimately. And that's the right attitude. We submit to the scriptures ultimately, but we recognize that God in His goodness and Christ from His throne as King and head of the church has given to the church those ministries of teaching. When we allow remaining sin to dictate our attitude, ang maaaring maging isip natin, I see the teachings of the church as a matter of tradition. Parang isipin natin, reform kasi, baptist kasi. And the attitude then is, there is no need to be dogmatic. At ang magiging diwa nito, I will not let the teachers of the church to be my necessary guide for what to believe. And that is a form of rebellion and pride, not to humble oneself to the teaching ministries and gifts that Christ has so generously granted to the church. Ang hamon nito sa bawat isa, kung tayo magsisikap sa kaparaanan ng disiplina sa iglesia, regard biblical teaching of greater value than personal attachments. There are times when we will have to exercise censure because the teaching is being compromised violated or dissension is being sowed, and we need to exercise discipline. And at such points, our personal attachments may come in the way, ay dapat nating higitan ang personal attachment ng ating commitment sa pagtuturo. At ito'y para sa ating kabanalan, hindi ito para lang sa tradisyon na gusto nating panatilihin. Kaya sa usapin ng kasangkapan ng biyaya, ilagay natin sa ating isip na inilagay ng Diyos ang pagdidisiplina para panatilihin ang isang marka ng iglesia na nagtuturo ng katotohanan at nangangaral ng ebanghelyo, at ito ay para sa ating kabanalan. Maraming salamat sa inyong pakikinig. Sana kayo ay nakinabang. Muli, pagpalain kayo ng Ama, ng kanyang pag-ibig, at ng Anak sa kanyang biyaya, at ang Espiritu sa kanyang pakikipisan sa atin.